you see the stylish?
Welcome to the Young IPA podcast. I'm James, this is Pete.
G'day everyone.
It is the 23rd of September. We've got a big show coming up. It's going to be a bit Victoria focused, so apologies to our interstate listeners, but there is a whole lot in Victoria we want to talk about right now. So first up, we've got Sanjeev Sabhlok. He is the senior public servant with the Victorian Treasury who quit his job last week over the government's lockdown strategy. He's going to be telling us why he did that. He's going to be talking about the groupthink that exists at the top echelons of the Victorian government, which is why we have such a single-track mind here from our leaders about lockdown restrictions and so on. Also going to be talking to a friend of the show, David Limbrick MP from the Liberal Democrats. He is one of the crossbenchers that is going to basically decide if Victoria is a complete police state or not coming up soon, because this COVID Omnibus Bill, which we're about to talk about, is going before the upper house here in Victoria, and there are some provisions in there which are truly, truly frightening. So, big two interviews coming up. Pete, anything you're looking forward to?
I think the highlight of the show has already been, likening Victoria's response to having a one-track mind. These are the fresh, hot takes you get at the Young IPA podcast, and that's why people keep tuning in week after week. No, both the interviews are awesome, and you should look out for that. To be honest, the highlight of the show for me is what's happening at the end. It's the trolling of the US Department of Education, which should happen all over the West, but I won't give it away now.
Yeah, that is going to be great. But we do have to start with this omnibus bill, which is completely terrifying and extraordinary. So this is a bill that Daniel Andrews has got through the lower house of the Victorian Parliament, and it's coming up to the upper house now. And it's giving the police and other people sanctioned by public servants here in Victoria a lot more power to detain people, a lot more power to arrest people, and a lot more power to enforce the law. So here's some of the stuff that is available under this bill. So any person that the authorised officer or a public servant reasonably believes is likely to fail to comply with an emergency direction and is a close contact of a person diagnosed with COVID-19 is allowed to be arrested, and detainment can go on for as long as that person decides is okay. Now, usually under the state of emergency powers here in Victoria, this has been at the discretion of the Victoria Police. This is now expanded to anyone that public servants deem allowed. So we're talking PSOs, we are talking private security guards. There's even cases that people are bringing up right now, which could involve Labor Party officials talking about small businesses, or union people talking about the businesses that they are, up against in industrial disputes. It's completely extraordinary that this is even being considered, let alone being debated and possibly even passed. Pete, what were your takes?
Well, the thing that I thought about this was, and you described it really well, I would add that it also has the powers to detain children. The thing that I would add about this is that it's just terrifying what's become normal. It's terrifying. The things that would have been incredible national scandals 6 months ago now happen every couple of days and no one even notices it. We've got a curfew, we've got the state under house arrest. We had a case in the last couple of weeks where a woman with cerebral palsy and her elderly mother were told to move on by police, and they sat down during a walk because they were tired, and the police made them move on. And it's terrifying that this is even on the table, let alone has a chance of getting passed. John Roscombe called this the most dramatic violation. John Roscombe, our boss here at the IPA, obviously, called this the most dramatic violation of human rights in Australian history. This is incredible stuff, and it's massive news. Even Julian Bernstein finally got off the couch and criticised this, abuse of human rights. So yeah, huge stuff. What about you, James?
That was exactly what I was going to say. If you've lost Julian Burnside, if Daniel Andrews has lost Julian Burnside, things have gone extraordinary. So, I don't know. It's really dark. The latest coming out from the upper house is that it probably won't pass. Fiona Patten and the Greens, who were two of the reasons that Daniel Andrews was able to extend his 6-month state of emergency, have said they're not supporting the bill in the current form, which in a sense is good, but in another sense, like that was the language he chose. I'm just not going to support the bill in the current form. Not this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I can't believe it even passed the lower house, but take victories where you can get it. So hopefully it doesn't pass. We are going to be talking to David Limbrick about his opinions later, but I don't think I expressed myself that clearly. Theoretically, union officials could be handed incredibly powerful industrial relations weapon of being able to detain any employer who they classified as likely to offend. That's from Gottliebsen's column in The Australian a few days ago. So that's basically where we were at. I mean, on suspicion that you're likely to break a restriction, that is incredible. So if you just go, maybe they're a bit lax about the curfew, maybe they're a bit lax about the 5Ks, I'm going to arrest them. That is where we might be at in Victoria. That is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, even someone who's just getting a bit mouthy and criticising the government, they could just be thought, they sound like they're going to commit a crime. And it's just whoever the government decides can become one of these officers. Interesting that you talked about with amendments or with change. What was it? The bill in its current form. They didn't want to accept the bill in its current form. I think the Greens want to include people who don't have renewable energy, and that's the kind of amendment they're looking for.
It doesn't go far enough.
Yeah, it doesn't go far enough. We can include a few more thought criminals in this. My favourite bit was Daniel Andrews, right? So this is sort of put to him as the press conference. This is an extraordinary, reversal of the rule of law, blah, 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 blah. Well, not blah, 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 but, that was the argument. Now, he said, I get that. This is an unprecedented time. And he said, in terms of recruitment, process, oversight, all that can be managed. It's like, how have you guys gone with recruiting your own private police force in the last few months? How have you guys gone doing that? Really? Don't worry about it. Dan Andrews and the gang have got it all sorted out. Don't worry, people of Victoria. It's fine.
Yeah, and the last point I'll bring up is that obviously there's been so many stories of Victoria Police, like the people who genuinely have been trained and are paid to keep us safe. There's so many stories of Victoria Police completely, overreacting, I would say, running over a guy and stomping on his head. And some of the other videos that we've all seen, the Zoe Bueller case, obviously. Now imagine those sort of powers trusted with people that aren't as well trained, like PSOs or private security guards. That's where we're at. And then we'll move on because we're going to be talking about a lot of those issues with David Limbrick because, the thing is, Daniel Andrews is still popular. We had the Newspoll come out earlier this week that shows that 62% of Victorians are satisfied with Daniel Andrews overall, that 62% of Victorians are satisfied with the way he's handling coronavirus. Go over to Queensland, it is even more. It's 63% for Anastasia Palaszczuk overall and 68% of people for her performance in handling coronavirus. I mean, it's kind of every leader seems to be doing quite well. Maybe it's slipping a bit from where it was a couple of months previously, but it's still a huge level of support for both the premiers and the way that they're handling coronavirus, despite all of the problems we're seeing.
Yeah, you're right. It was about 85% in April. But yeah, people are, I guess, rallying around the leaders at this point. I mean, as I said last time, because I think it was pretty much exactly the same amount. I think it was 61% or 62% a month ago in terms of handling of the pandemic. It's like, as I said then, which part is the bit that you think has been handled well? Because even people who agree with the overall strategy, how on earth could you argue that the implementation of that strategy has been good? But it's interesting. I think talking to people who aren't that engaged, or not that engaged, because everyone's engaged these days, but talking to people, they just sort of say, well, 200,000 deaths in America. I get it hasn't been perfect, but we're only on 800 deaths in Australia and 700 odd deaths, I think, in Victoria, or 600 maybe. So people just say, look, we haven't done that badly. And it's sort of like, okay, well, it's good that you're comparing us with America. Maybe you should compare Victoria with New South Wales. But I think that's where it comes from.
I would assume so too. And then a lot of people citing all the rising case numbers in Europe that we're about to get into as well. And I think it's just also, it says a lot about people's relationship with authority in times of crisis. I mean, I think you just trust the leader because the alternative, which is what Pete and I are in and what a lot of our listeners would be in, where you're in a crisis and you don't trust the leader, is an incredibly distressing period to find yourself in. So if you can just go, look, I support it, I don't know, it helps you sleep at night. Like, I'm not saying that people are lying to themselves, but I'm just saying that you might default to trusting the people in the crisis because the alternative is too distressing.
Yeah, it's definitely more frustrating going through this thinking that we don't necessarily have to be going through all of this. And there's probably an element, like I've even pulled back from just dropping my truth bombs on non-political group chats because, I don't want to make life more difficult for people, but
you're a better man than me. I can't hold myself back.
It could be a nil or a draw, but yeah. And there's the two Australias thing. So there's a lot of people out there that are like, there's just a bit of watching Netflix, and they don't know anyone who it's more than watching Netflix. So yeah, there's an element of that too.
All right. So third topic I want to talk about is the Queensland ACT border. Now, a lot of listeners, a lot of members of the IPA, Pete and I, we were fired up that Sarah Caisip was banned from her father's funeral despite the ACT not having a case of coronavirus for 62 days and Queensland still labelling the place a hotspot. Banned from the funeral, forced to attend on a private viewing, dressed in full PPE gear, under police guard in case that she should, hug her mother as they bury their father. But that is where Queensland were at. And now a miraculous change because the ACT border is getting relaxed. ACT residents will not have to quarantine themselves when visiting Queensland. So bad luck for Sarah. Missed out by only a couple of days. But, to me, this is the extraordinary thing about how a lot of the leaders say they're following the science advice, but it's clearly polls. Like, clearly they would have gone, okay, the election is coming up, the public sided with Sarah, and things need to change. And we saw them wheel out Jeanette Young to say that some of the decisions they're making are scientific when, apparently it's a scientific reason that Tom Hanks brings movie money in. But it's this innocent person getting caught up in the world of poll-driven politicking, and your heart just absolutely goes out to her.
Yeah, the Jeanette Young School of Public Relations. But, it is interesting. Like, it's sort of, that's democracy. People follow the polls. That's kind of how it works. It's not, most political leaders, don't have the leadership. It's a very special political leader, a very talented political leader that says, this is not popular, but I'm going to eventually win this argument if I just, explain it to the people, and eventually they'll accept it. Kind of like, I guess, the Hawke-Keating economic reforms were sort of difficult.
I was just going to go Churchill against Hitler. 1938.
Churchill against Hitler, yeah. Most polls just follow the polls, which is why, it's important for people to change their mind and answer the polls differently.
Yeah, I should say, it's a good thing that the border has opened up, so we should be going, there's got to be the carrot and the stick of just going okay, good, you've opened up the borders, and then South Australia have opened up the borders to New South Wales, this is where we should be going. But it's just so annoying that it takes a woman losing her father to get any traction on the case going, and not the clear economic and clear livelihood benefits it's going to provide to so many people. It's just when the media gets the story, that's when things change. All right, should we talk Europe?
Let's talk Europe. So, James, daily case numbers in the European Union and United Kingdom this week reached record highs of more than 45,000 on a 14-day notification rate, according to the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. So, new restrictions are being brought in a lot of places, different parts of Europe. I won't go through them all. New restrictions were announced on Friday in Madrid. Britain registered 4,000 new cases, the highest since early May. So it's interesting, James, what's going to happen here, because we've seen, we've talked about, relationship between people and leaders here in Victoria and here in Australia, how the Europeans will react to the idea that they'll go back into lockdown if in fact that's what happens, because we've already seen protests in Britain about that over the weekend, about not going back into lockdown. So it'll be interesting to see if the Europeans are like, nah, no way are we doing that. What do you think?
Yeah, so the Britain one's going to be interesting. So they've brought in that you can't have, I think it's the rule of 6 is what they're calling it. You can only have 6 people over at one time. And then the latest restriction being the pubs and bars have to close at 10. And part of me just goes, because I'm just seeing the anger in Britain at that. And then you just reflect on just how bad restrictions are here in Victoria that we don't even have those. Yeah. So there is that. Look, a lot of countries are bracing for a second lockdown, and this stat is only available as of recording right now, so maybe this take will age horribly, but I can tell you one country that's certainly not bracing for a second wave at the moment, and that is Sweden. So you just wonder if lockdowns and restrictions are the golden policy that is going to defeat coronavirus. And I don't know, it's this classic thing of is this going to be the answer every time cases rise until we have a vaccine? We're just going to free up the economy a little bit and then cases will rise because obviously that's what's happened, and then we've got to lock down again, and then we'll ease restrictions and then lock down again. is that, considering that the vaccines might not be here for at least a year, maybe two, maybe even longer, is this seriously how we're going to spend the next couple of years of our lives?
Yeah, well, that's interesting, and that's what's driving their policy here in Victoria of we're not opening up until we get to zero, because they know how politically difficult it would be to lock down again if numbers went up again. It's interesting, that point you're raising. Like, it was like, we'll lock down and we'll get rid of it, and then we'll move on with our lives, and that's what everyone out there thinks is going to happen. But it's like the chances of that actually happening are pretty low. Like, the numbers probably will come back again, and it's if governments are willing to prepare to live with the virus without complete lockdowns. You can see studies have come out in the last few months saying, there was a study, I think, of 50 different countries worst hit by the pandemic up until May. They all had different levels of lockdown, and they all had different paces at which those lockdowns were brought in, and the researchers couldn't find a relationship between lockdown and deaths. It doesn't mean that relationship wasn't there, it just means they couldn't find it. So there's things like that. We saw that the MIT study that we've talked about a few times, which showed that measures directed towards vulnerable groups are more effective than blanket lockdowns in terms of saving lives, rather than wasting money locking down people who don't need to be protected.
That seemed to be the takeaway from Southeast Asia, the countries that were able to really make sure that they were there for the elderly and they didn't lock down other parts of society, did manage to get through pretty easily. Yeah,
so it's interesting to see if whether countries are prepared to do that. The Sweden one's good. We don't want to jump the gun like all the ABC journalists did and say as soon as Sweden's death rate was higher than like Norway, go, it's failed. But it is interesting to see that their numbers are going up.
When Sweden's economy contracts, because literally every country in the world had their economy contract, and they go, see, they didn't even get what they wanted on that side. It's like, because welcome to globalization. This is what happens.
And they said it's the economy versus lives, and it hasn't saved the economy. It's like, you guys invented the economy versus lives things. That was you. We never said it was about the economy. It's just better to have your freedoms if losing them makes no difference to the virus. So, because like a guy came out, this epidemiologist in Denmark, and said, Sweden's right. This proves that Sweden's right. And that was like this week, and the Swedish minister guy goes, the guy in charge goes, poured complete cold water on it.
I think he had it right the first time. I think his title is Minister Guy.
Yeah. The guy, every country's now got, the guy or the woman in charge.
Yeah, the minister guy.
Yeah. And he goes, he's like, that. He said, as they've all been saying in Sweden, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Because they've straight away twigged to the fact that this is going to go on for years and years, and it's not sustainable to keep people in lockdown for years. Anyway, we'll see what happens. We're not calling either way.
Okay, last story we should talk about. So this is something that's got the US in a fair bit of division at the moment, certainly online. That is the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the US Supreme Court Justice. So her death opens up a Supreme Court vacancy, obviously very contested, only, less than 2 months out from an election. Donald Trump might be able to install another conservative into the Supreme Court, and there is a whole lot of ramifications of that. I don't know. I would start off with this. I don't know if my expectations are just this low for him or if he actually spoke very well, but I thought what Trump actually said when he was told about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death was pretty good. There was footage of him literally being told on camera and him just going, she had an extraordinary life, and just expanded on that. And I just thought, I thought you would have immediately reached out for your phone and tweeted something. But, he's right. Like, that is an extraordinary life, regardless of what you think about her policies. And I don't know, here we are now with a very divided country 50 days before an election.
Yeah, and it's sort of thrown another thing into the mix. It's interesting because it's obviously a culture war who is on the Supreme Court, but it's a really substantive issue as well, because who is on the Supreme Court has a big impact on American life for decades, because they can be there for ages. And the way the American political system is set up is that a lot of things end up before the Supreme Court and in the court system and are not solved by politics, more so than in Australia and other places. And particularly really contested social issues like abortion and gay marriage and stuff like that. So, it is a big deal. And the reason a lot of people voted for Trump was because they thought, I don't like this guy, but he is going to make conservative appointments to the Supreme Court and conservative appointments to the federal courts. And he's done hundreds of appointments to the federal court and a couple of appointments to the Supreme Court. So, and he sort of said that's my biggest achievement of my presidency. So it is a big deal. The Democrats are kind of trying to invoke this thing that you're not meant to make a change to the Supreme Court in the last year of your term as a president, which kind of feels, looking back at it, is one of those issues that people flip-flop on depending on who's actually got the choice.
Yeah, it's the most obvious political football. Like, when we do it, fine. When you do it, not cool. Not cool, man. Why would you do that?
So this whole thing that Trump's the worst person in history for doing it is obviously not true. Be interesting to see who he chooses. Interesting to see how it plays out, because it has to happen quickly.
The other part is, like, I saw a lot of very emotional statuses from friends of mine, both here and in America, people really feeling lost and feeling aggrieved, and certainly that's something that you see a lot of, not even just from friends of yours, you just see it in the media. My thought is, if one person's death has this much context over the future of America, right? If this person's like, our rights are either existing or they're all for nothing just on this person's life, then that person might have just a little bit too much power. There might just be a little too much power at the very highest points of American society if everything comes up or down based on whether this person is breathing.
So, James Bolt, headline, James Bolt, America's constitutional architects got it wrong.
No, I'm just saying, like, maybe there are way too many things that the Supreme Court need to decide and that the president needs to decide and the Congress needs to decide, because if you've got that much wrapped up with these small groups of people, then they probably have a bit too much power. Would be my thought. Potentially. Not and then the last
wrong.
one, a popular one from Chuck Schumer and from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was the idea that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, her dying wish that was her seat would not be filled until there was a new president installed. Like, that phrasing was interesting in itself, new president installed. And I don't know, maybe we have to cut this part, but I do like the idea that that would abrogate the Constitution. Like, that I know what the Constitution says, but that was a dying wish. Like, I mean, Trump lost his brother. Imagine if he just came out and said, look, guys, my brother's dying wish was 4 more years. Sorry, we called it just cancel the election.
Yeah. Taking that on face value, if that's actually what happens, like, with all due respect to her, that's straight up not how it works. So,
yeah.
I didn't realise we could say we might have to cut this bit before stuff.
I'm just giving producer Saul, just like, if you need to hover over the red button, do so now, and maybe write down the time code in case we do need to take it out. But if people are listening to this, producer Saul says it's okay. All right. Got to keep it tight because we've got 2 big interviews. So we'll move on to heroes and villains. This is the Grunt the Pig Freedom Snort for anyone who anyone who stood up for freedom this week. Bit of a teaser as to what mine is going to be, but Pete, who is your hero this week?
I accidentally scrolled down to my villain, but now I'm in the right spot. My hero this week... Yeah,
that would be a bad one to mix up.
It would have been, especially this week. My hero this week is Daniel Ek, CEO of Spotify. So Vice reported that Spotify employees have conducted more than 10 meetings to try and get episodes of Joe Rogan's podcast taken off the platform because it is allegedly transphobic. Of particular focus is an interview he had with, or a conversation as Joe does it, with Abigail Schreier, who wrote Irreversible Damage, the transgender craze seducing our daughters. Potentially this has gone all the way to the top of Spotify, where Daniel Ek has gone, no mate, sorry, we're not getting rid of it.
So you know how much money we paid for this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
This would be the worst thing we would do.
And it's like the fact that Spotify battlers think they can, like, tell Joe Rogan to take down episodes of his podcast is just unbelievably 2020. Just good on him for not being a coward. That's the other side of cancel culture and sticking with it.
Yeah, hopefully, because the Joe Rogan podcast being one of the last freewheeling interviews where people seem to be uncancelable for what they say on the Joe Rogan podcast, unless Elon Musk takes a hit from a blunt and sends his stock price crashing. But if we lose Joe Rogan podcast, we lose a lot. So hopefully see the Spotify stays true. Okay, my hero this week is basically anyone out there that donated to the Zoe Bueller Legal Defense Fund. I have just logged out of the page for some reason. No, I'm back in. So yeah, the Zoe Bueller's Legal Defense Fund raised $58,000, $151 in just the first week. Zoe Bueller obviously being the Ballarat woman who was handcuffed and let out in front of her children because of the crime of posting a status to Facebook, which is one of the more disgusting things I've ever seen. So, Liberty Works great people. They have set up a GoFundMe to raise money for Zoe's legal costs. As I said, we're at 58,000 in just a week. Go to give.libertyworks.org.au/free Zoe Bueller with like dashes between the words if you want to join in and donate, because it is such an important case. All right, villains.
Great stuff. All right, so Extinction Rebellion, fake nudity run, villainy of the week awards. Roll the tape.
As Extinction Rebellion protests enter their 6th day.
Of course, that was the fake nudity run that we now call anyone who opposes freedom. We give them the fake nudity run award. James, who is your nominee for this week?
All right, so Dr. Stephen Downes, renowned restaurant critic, has written for The Age, The Sunday Age, The Australian Financial Review, and The Herald Sun. Now, with the recovery roadmap at the moment, and I don't know if other states are approaching this as much as Melbourne, but we're certainly looking to Europe and to New York for our recovery as being, okay, instead of eating inside, maybe you could eat outside, because that will slow the spread of, disease. I'm blanking on the word. Disease spreading. We'll just go with that. Sorry, eat outside. Which
Lucky
would be
you're not the
one,
minister guy.
Luckily, I'm not Minister Guide. Which would be one, the right thing to do, help businesses out, repeal some laws that are going to make sure that people can do these things. And two, eating outside is cool. But not so for Stephen Downes, who objected to this, not on the grounds that, as we talked to Dom Talamanidis, not on the grounds that eating outside might not be viable for all these restaurants, not on the grounds that there are better places to deregulate, which would all be worthwhile things to do, but I certainly think that businesses should have the option to make people eat outside if they so wish. But he just goes because it's not cool. Quote, Melbourne is not New York, Rome or Paris. Eating outdoors in those cities is performed for performance reasons. You want to be seen to be doing it. It's cool. You may watch strange folk trying to be cool. You may imagine that you're a local. Melbournians, on the other hand, are considerably more sophisticated. We eat outdoors to revel in flavours and textures. We are smart diners, perhaps the world's smartest. Have you ever heard someone sound more like a jerk and more like a person I would want absolutely nowhere near my meal than Dr. Stephen Downes?
Well, that is the worst actually, of all time. It's like, come on, mate, now's not the time. I don't even understand his argument. So is he saying we shouldn't have outdoor dining, or that we do it for
shouldn't have
different
outdoor
reasons?
dining because it's not cool?
Come on, mate.
Imagine wanting to support your state's hospitality recovery is such a Chad move. Why would you want to be that?
People in Melbourne eat outside all the time anyway. It's just when it's sunny. Not with that. What was that guy's name?
Dr. Stephen Downes.
Well,
extraordinary piece.
He's a food critic that's a doctor. There's your problem. Now, I'm going to take my food critic business elsewhere, James. Put it that way. Okay, my villain is the mad effing witches, who are up in the villains column pretty regularly. They are just the worst. So the mad effing witches, can't say it properly because this is a family podcast. They tweeted during the week, "Witches, overnight our team has worked our asses off and has updated the Death Merchants tab in this link," which was definitely a link to the website an old person made, "to provide you with all the contact details you need for these bastard restaurants threatening Vic lockdown rules." It went on. "Now it's your turn. Get in touch with them via those deets and advise you're boycotting their eatery till they publicly withdraw support for the IPA-backed stance." And then it goes on, but that's the main bit of it. Now,
I like we get a mention.
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't realise that till I got to the second link, but yeah, we got a mention, and they the tab on the website did for some reason have like BHP and AIG and stuff like that, which are massive companies, but it also had mum and dad buddy restaurants, and the fact that you would get people to harass and intimidate people who are struggling or already on their knees during a pandemic, I don't know what kind of flog you must be to do that. And I just think these people are horrendous. You are horrendous. Like, imagine these people, they can't open, they've got to homeschool their kids, they're watching their lives slip away, and they get a call from some absolute nuffer who's never done anything in their life saying, "Oh, I don't like your stance on the lockdown." Nah.
You know, with these emotions running rampant in society, I'm just glad that the presence of police powers has been expanded to people that are not the police.
Yeah.
Who knows who's got them now?
Yeah. Give it to the bloody mad witches, whatever they're called. They're
right.
Terrible.
Okay. So, like I said, we've got two big interviews. We have Sanjeev Sabhlok, the Victorian senior public servant that quit his job over lockdown strategy. We're going to be talking to him about why and the groupthink that exists. And then we're going to be talking to David Limbrick about this COVID omnibus. So I'll go to those interviews now. Okay, we're now welcome on to the show Sanjeev Sabhlok, who is a former economist with the Victorian Department of Treasury and Finance. And Sanjeev has quit his job this week after being told to remove social media posts critical of Victoria's handling of lockdowns and coronavirus in general, and then wrote about what should have happened in an article for the Australian Financial Review this week titled "Why I Quit Rather Than Be Silenced," which everyone should read. So I want to start right there, Sanjeev. What inspired you to write that article?
Well, the article was the natural consequence of the need for me to speak. I have been obviously trying to speak within the department. I'm a lifelong career public servant. Okay, so I've spent nearly 18 plus years in India in the senior executive service and another 19 and a half years in Australia, all in the public sector. So I'm a very diligent and, public servant who wants to keep everything confidential and do things in the right way. So I had obviously, raised a lot of matters internally, and that wasn't obviously heard. Leading me to obviously social media to vent some of my general thoughts, which continued for about a few months. And then it became really personal. I got really upset, and I explained this to my managers and so on, that this whole thing is very upsetting personally. And that is when they start imposing restrictions like face masks in the open air. And I'm a very diligent face mask guy. I've been writing about this. I've written 17 articles about this in my Times of India blog over the last 6 months. And I have advocated masks as a defense measure, as a kind of an additional defense, but only when you need it. And you don't use, you don't use your defense everywhere in the world. You use it where it's likely to be an issue. So open air, 50, 60 meters open air walking in Rafi Lake Park. I recorded a video and sent it to the chief health officer by Twitter saying, "Hey, Guy, can you please explain to me what's the logic behind this?" Because, one of the fundamental principles is that all regulation needs to be risk-based, and all of it needs to be proportionate, and all of it needs to be justified, and so that it's very clear to the people why they're doing certain things. Because the law is not necessarily right all the time, and you have to make sure that the public understand it. As Hayek says, law is something that you believe as a society. In the end, it's something that you adopt naturally because it is the right thing to do. And for that, you need to know why it is so. The food regulation, for example, everybody in society accepts the kind of restriction on food regulation because we know there are risks, and it's very risk-based, by the way. Let me assure you that, because I've worked in food regulation and food safety. So, and I worked in health and safety as well in the Victorian Worker Authority. So the net point was that I was getting personally aggravated. There wasn't any way out within the department to raise the matters. And I started getting really, and what really then really hit me personally, because I'm one of those guys who really, really hates brutality by anybody. And I started seeing police brutalities. First of all, they bashed up somebody, was not wearing a mask, a young girl or something. And then they started entering into and the curfew. So people's, videos coming out, police are coming and asking questions if you stand 1 meter outside your house. Hey, guy, there's no one around. What are you talking about? Why are you here, police? What are you trying to do here in this, So the whole thing began to resonate to sound to me like 1984, like the police state, the totalitarianism of communism. And by the way, the laws that were imposed, the restrictions, this business, thou shalt do this and thou shalt do that. This is exactly what communism does. So we suddenly degenerated from an emergency or crisis situation into a full-blown communist state. Now, obviously, these matters are, being a public servant, I raised them on a more general basis for a long time, but then it started getting really personal when the brutality started increasing in a very large way. And I actually really got pissed off, that's the word, and I think I expressed some things which I haven't even looked at what I expressed, because I think I stand by everything I've said. These are my honest emotions and feelings. And I don't think I've violated any of the conduct rules, because I'm allowed to speak on things which I do not deal with in my official capacity. But, when I was asked at that stage on the 9th, that is last week, not this week, last Wednesday, after at 3:45, the meeting was held, and I was asked by DDF senior executive, hey, guy, that I would remove my social media posts that are critical, either directly or indirectly, of this, the situation that's happening in front of us. At that time, I think I basically decided at that point that this is ridiculous, because I actually need to now get out, raise the alarm. It's no longer worthwhile to stay and support this this totalitarian state for the simple reason that I do not serve Dan Andrews. I do not serve Ted Belu. I serve the people of Victoria. I get paid by the taxpayers. I don't get paid by Ted Belu or by Dan Andrews or whoever is the premier. I'm not naming anybody, but I do not serve a government. I'm here to provide the best possible advice and be, and provide value for money to the taxpayer. And I think at that stage when I can't do that, I decided I need to speak out. And I think that was nothing more than what I've been saying more or less for the last 17 articles in the Times of India and then thousands of tweets and social media posts over the last 6 months. So I've been arguing for good policy making in this space. And I think I made the same argument in my Fin Review article. And as I said, 2 days ago, they accepted it. And I wrote it on Tuesday, and they accepted it immediately. And then they wanted to do due diligence on me to see that actually I was a genuine character. And they found that it's true, and then they did publish it. And I think I'm sort of amazed at the kind of uptake of that issue. It's been reported in the Australian, the Daily Mail, and there've been some, as I said, some interviews from television. I'm really delighted that the society is ready to listen to this in a more formal manner. I'm now a public, commentator, a free citizen. And I speak and assert my rights. And I want to emphasize, I'm asserting my rights that I will not allow Victoria to become China. I will fight till the very end, and I will not allow that. And I think if everyone decides that they will not allow their country to become China, Wuhan, and to have unprincipled policy, unjustified policy, if all of us decide that as a country, as a state, I think Australia will come out of this much stronger. And one of the things I've argued I think a couple of weeks ago, and I published in the Catholic Sea Files as well, is I think Australia finally needs to really think about the powers that we give to our governments during these pandemics and internal crisis. I love the Swedish model, which does not allow the government to restrict any of the liberties, except in war. So, peacetime emergency is not permitted in Sweden. And so they could not restrict any of the, power of citizens, so they had to allow, voluntary self-determination by citizens. And I think that's the fundamental lesson it's the next evolution in freedom. I've been writing a lot about freedom, and I've written a manuscript is about 600 pages long. A number of other things I've been writing. So I think there's an evolution of freedom. When you look at the way it started with John Locke, and then it moves into Jefferson, and then it moves, further into the fight against communism. And now we are fighting against ourselves as a Western civilization that has forgotten the principles of liberty and forgotten the fact that the state, that the government is our servant, and the servant does not have the power to bind the master. I am the master, Dan Andrews is my servant, and he does not have the power to bind me with a mask in outdoor spaces unless I am persuaded that that's the right thing for me. Okay, so
I think that's what I want to ask you about, is because what we're seeing is that there's just so much power right now with the bureaucracy in Victoria, and then the bureaucrats are the ones that are making these decisions that are affecting so many people financially, but they're not the ones that are being affected as much. Do you reckon there is a strong groupthink within Victoria Treasury, or do you reckon there are people like you there that are able to express themselves freely?
I can assure you there is a very strong level of groupthink. I've been getting messages from my former DTF colleagues. Many of them have written to me in great support of my actions and confirming the groupthink that they are experiencing in their life within the department. I believe that this is a matter I'm going to raise. I've alluded to this tangentially in my Fin Review thing. I've actually raised two governance issues about the groupthink issue, and I've raised the issue about the incentives of the senior bureaucracy. And I will elaborate upon these in the coming, and I think I've raised the matter with the constitutional issue with you now, and I've also put on Catholic Sea. I want to write about these governance issues. To me, that's a really significant thing that the bureaucracy, and I think I mentioned to Peter yesterday in the Sky News thing, that there is this obligation. There's a very strong distinction within an effective government between line agencies and the central agencies. I don't know whether you worked in government, but we actually see that as a very strong distinction, because line agencies are the experts in their field. But the Premier's department and the Treasury, we are not experts in that field, but we basically professionally trained to look at the whole society, and not just now, but in the future, and to look at not just the direct effects, but also the indirect effects, and to look at the visible and the invisible. And that kind of training that we have and we are paid for has to be applied to every policy that the government takes, so that Victoria as a whole is served well from the billions of dollars being spent on public servants, people like us. So I think there have been a number of governance issues and governance failures that I will be raising quite significantly. And groupthink is a very serious issue, by the way, in this case.
Sanjeev, one of the parts of your piece that I loved the most was when you wrote, voluntary performance-based rules would allow the private sector to innovate, leaving people with the power of agency to determine their own fate. Now, you talked about groupthink in the bureaucracy and how it's a big issue. Did you ever say that sentence in a meeting in the bureaucracy? Because surely the building would self-combust at the very prospect of the idea that people could make decisions about their own lives. I guess what I'm asking is, do you have any examples of where you kind of raised this idea that people should be free to make their own choices, and what kind of reaction that got from your colleagues?
Well, I can assure you, Peter, that there are a very large number of wonderful economists within the Treasury. I really love and admire them. They all understand exactly what I'm saying and what we've raised. We have raised these matters in our day-to-day policy advice for the last, I've been there for 15 years. I would not have been there if I had realized that these guys are pushing some kind of a socialist agenda. We are allowed and we are given the full freedom in the normal case of, normal situation to actually advise the government on all these matters. All right, so we have been doing that, and I think this particular thing is not something that I'm the first person. I mean, there's a huge history in economics, right? The whole idea that knowledge is diffused, that the knowledge of local circumstances is only known to everybody individually, with their budget constraints, with their circumstances, social information, and every business knows his or her field better than anybody can know. So as Hayek would say, that it's fatal conceit for us to try to imagine that we can find the answers for other people. All we can do as a government is to give them the broad performance measures and say, here guys, this is a bit of a risk out here, and I want you to be aware that these are the kind of things you could do, but I want you to ensure yourself an environment that is relatively free of risk. Now, you remember, we cannot have absolutely zero risk. That is an impossibility, and the government recognizes that in its own documents. So we are not talking of zero risk. This is an act of God, as you could say. As Mother Nature has given us something, or maybe, the Chinese lab, I don't really care, but the net result is it's an act of God of some sort. An act of God is not something that then you start applying restrictions that will actually go and kill other people.
One of the more depressing things about the way that the Victorian government's handled this is that there's so little parliamentary oversight or ways for people to push back against some of the ideas. And unfortunately, it does fall to people that are within the public service to be able to provide Daniel Andrews with alternative advice. Now, you mentioned before that you had colleagues that were writing to you saying that they agreed with you and saying that there are governance issues that are in the public service.
Absolutely.
Do you reckon there is enough people in there, potentially people in high places, that we actually can see some change? Because I don't think we're going to be able to push for change through other channels for at least the next couple of months.
Well, I think in the history of freedom, I don't think in months, I think in centuries. So look, my perspectives are slightly different. I believe that a thing of this sort that's raised, let me go back to the change in the public management system in Australia briefly, which actually was a very big deal in the 1990s when we changed from the public permanent bureaucracy to a contractual bureaucracy. Okay, that led to slightly different incentives. What I'm trying to say is that these things will take their own time. I believe that this debate needs to start now. I don't see any hope of any changes in the next 2 months. It would be utterly, delusional, I would say, to expect changes in 2 months. We would expect to see the same political stuff playing out. People doing politics, etc., whether it's liberal, labor, etc., and all that stuff will, the skirmishes will continue in this manner. But the issues that are coming out from this whole exercise, to me, are for one extra next step in the march towards freedom in the West. And that march is to slow down and prevent government from acting in the guise of an emergency. Because what's happened here is actually the emergency powers that have allowed Dan Andrews to really sideline everybody else. And if you look at my feedback from the department was that, hey, this is a matter for DHHS. Well, nothing in the world is a matter for DHHS. We're very sure that everything else is a matter for the whole government, including the Treasury and the premiers. But this one was a matter for DHHS, the experts. And I don't agree with the idea of experts, because experts do not know many other things. They are good at a narrow little thing, but they don't see the forest. They see the tree, but not the forest. And I think that's the whole purpose of central agency. So what we've seen is a systemic failure of governance. And I don't see any hope for, of any change happening. I know there are a lot of people within the ETF. They're very young, some of them. Some of them are middle-aged like me, actually a bit more than middle-aged now. But there are all kinds of people of different age groups. And I hope they will speak out one day. But I also would like to assure you that, and I've told them to not leave for this. And one of them said he wanted to leave. No, don't, please continue. There need to be good people inside. We need you to also, and by the way, some of them need that money to survive. And I think I really don't want anyone to be self-sacrificing themselves. As I said, I'm in a position where in another 6 years, I can depend upon the age pension. All right. I've reached a point where I could just got to survive 5-6 years, and I'm okay after that. I can somehow live and manage. But for the others, I don't want them to do that. And I think we should not expect the senior people in any case to do any of these things. If they had any guts, I've been talking about this to my own, some of my colleagues, on the telephone. If our secretary had any spine, if he had any spine, he would have resigned 6 months ago. These people.
So Sanjeev, it's interesting that you mentioned 6 months ago. You said in your piece that Victoria's response has been a sledgehammer to kill a swarm of flies. What should Victoria have done from the start, do you think?
That's a really good question. In fact, that's what I've been arguing from my first article in the 6th of March in 2020 in the Times of India. And I think I've made the same argument around the 25th of February to my senior colleagues in the department, and also raised those matters in a meeting. Then, of course, I was basically said it's not my business. But the argument is very straightforward. And I think a lot of epidemiologists, I've been in touch with people like Martin Kulldorff from the Harvard Medical School, what am I saying? And so he's been a great supporter of my ideas. And there are many other epidemiologists. One of them says that he's never ever heard of a lockdown for a flu-like virus in his whole life. And he's trained for 20 years in epidemiology. There are a large number of scientists. And so the argument is very clear. You need to look at the actual risks. The risks are very clear. They're distributed in a particular way for this virus. Therefore, you need to take a risk-based approach, look at the options. So the options could be ranging from isolating the elderly in a very safe place up till the virus passes. Now, here's another interesting thing. If you look at the history of all viruses, they actually have a peak within 6 weeks. They do not actually linger on too long unless you try to flatten the curve forever. They come and they go. And so all you need to do is during the first 6 weeks when the virus is at its peak, you need to really take the elderly out of circulation. And the very young can actually continue their life with normalcy, and the middle category people up to the age of 40 should go around with masks in public transport, and others like me should work from home, like 60 plus. Okay, so I had given all this advice and I published all this stuff. So there is that, by the way, can be done even right now. Now that will mean that you actually allow the virus to pass through the young people who are not going to get affected. They get the immunity, and they can thereafter the elderly can come out because the virus is no longer transmitting in the society. That would be the excellent approach. Now, Sweden tried to do a bit of that, but they failed. And I think they've admitted, Anders Tegnell, that they took a long time to protect the elderly. I think the first step should have been done was to protect the elderly everywhere in the world. And I think if we do that well, even now, after 6 months, it's shocking that we have still got deaths in our aged care homes. If we manage to make sure that our aged care homes are protected and the elderly within homes are protected by giving them adequate information and potentially any support, I think we will reach the point where the virus can be allowed to run through and it will have virtually no effect on society. This virus, by the way, the data are very clear now. Earlier when we were 6 months ago, but by the way, what I'm arguing is that even if it was Spanish flu, you would still need to do the same things. You would not have a lockdown because lockdowns, by the way, are also prohibited in the World Health Organization's October 2019 book on the non-pharmaceutical interventions for flu pandemics. That's, by the way, their own recommendation that this is not recommended in any circumstances. You can read that on your own. That's there in their website. And it's a full-fledged book with full research, which says under no circumstances you're going to have mass quarantines. Okay, they do not protect, they do not kill the virus. All you need to do is to take a risk-based approach. So right from the beginning, we have what I've done. What I believe here is we've had groupthink on a mass scale, with the images coming from China first. Then we had some Italy images. People went into panic mode, and I think that panic mode has cost us the extra deaths, which I blame on purely on Daniel Andrew. The deaths that would have come from the Mother Nature, we could have lived with, but the deaths that have come outside that, the death that would have otherwise come, I blame them on man. The man in this case is Daniel Andrews. Yeah.
Might be hard to ask an economist to look into human nature, but I kind of feel that with the government gone this far already and stuck to these policies for so long that it's now too late for them to change course. It's just too much of a problem for them to say, okay, we might have got things wrong. Here's how we can open up the economy. Here's how we can do things differently. Now, the colleagues that you spoke to and the people that you knew when you were in the Treasury, do you reckon there's any people there that would be able to accelerate Victoria's way out of lockdowns a bit quicker and maybe institute something different as a policy response? Or is this going to be the plan?
Look, James, my belief is that DTF has some of the smartest economists around. I have always believed that Victoria's Treasury is the best in Australia, and we are definitely among the best in the world. I'm not joking here, because I've got strong proofs about the kind of advice that we've given is really cutting edge. And so there's the very high quality people within the Treasury. We have a very good recruitment system here. So the concern is not about the economists and the advice that they can provide. The issue is really the political issue, whether the politicians are ready to listen. And I believe I've written to the Treasurer, Tim Pallas, suggesting that I'm happy to talk to him about this issue, because there are a number of people, there are hundreds of people within DTF who can actually do a cost-benefit analysis, who can organize it through by the way, we've got a vast array of consultants and experts in Victoria who can do wonderful cost-benefit analysis. So all we need is to do that stuff and risk assessments. And what we need is the inputs from the epidemiological models. By all means, put that as an input and a scenario analysis, but leave the total analysis to those who look at the whole society. So the question you asked is what I finally raised in my last paragraph in my fin review. There are politicians ready to do this. And by the way, if they don't, they're taking Victoria down into a ditch. They're taking Australia down into a ditch that is so deep from which it'll be very hard to recover for potentially decades to come. And I think what I'm hearing from within my Treasury, I'm sure you might have heard from friends and other colleagues and others, there is going to be a mass exodus from this place. People have lost trust in the government here. There are a lot of people who support this kind of thing, and I think they haven't understood. By the way, this reminds me, this I call it great hysteria for a very good reason. This is all the characteristics of a hysteria, because people, if you ask them and poll them, they have been hyped and scared enough to believe now that this thing is hundreds of times more dangerous and it's killed hundreds of times more people than it actually has. So what's happening? They are very scared. So when you scare people to this extent, okay, then how do you unscare them? And this is the kind of question these guys should have asked in the beginning. If you scare everyone to this extent, how do you get out of this mess? So they've ended up now. The hole that they've dug is so big, it's so mind-boggling. It's $400 billion worth of damage to the economy in Australia, and I think $1 billion a day in Victoria, or something of the sort, or $500 million or something. The numbers are mind-boggling in terms of the billions, but I'm not talking about the lives lost. So we have, and by the way, this is not the end of it. If they continue the stage 4, if they continue to this kind of curfews which are totally unjustified, and the curfew, and they start brutalizing the people, I don't know what are they trying to get out of this. Are we Australia at all? I didn't come to this country, honestly, for 20 years ago. If I had known that Australia would do this kind of thing, I wouldn't be here, guys. I would be probably back in India. India was at least tolerable. It's a mess, but at least it's not such a bad mess. Right now, people in India, the lockdowns are mostly over. People are getting out and doing their normal things. The virus has killed barely three days worth of extra deaths in India. It's about 75,000 extra deaths in India from this virus, compared with 1 million deaths every year on average in India. No, sorry, what am I saying? It's Yeah, 1 million deaths in India per year, by the way. And there are 160,000 deaths in Australia as well per year. So we're looking at, the virus having basically passed through most of India, and the lockdowns are fine. So I would be better off right now to get back to India. So we need to, as a society, decide what we want to do. And the challenge of politicians is really, they do a lot of polling all the time. They're driven by polling, okay? And until the people of Victoria change their mind, and by the way, this happens with all hysterias. No hysteria, if you look at the history of hysteria, this, by the way, is the greatest of all hysterias in the world's history. But all hysterias finally come to an end. And this hysteria, when it ends, it'll be one person at a time deciding for himself, oh, it wasn't that big really a deal. This one is not even as big as the Asian flu. It's not as big as the Hong Kong flu. And these are all 30-year, they come every 30 years, these kind of pandemics. So calling it a Spanish flu, thinking of it as Spanish flu, thinking that hundreds of times more people have died, that panic and the scare that has been caused by the politicians, by our experts, like our chief health officer, who's been talking about this as Spanish flu. I mean, the guy is absolutely berserk. I can't believe he's a doctor. He doesn't care for what the consequential damage is doing. I mean, and by the way, there are a lot of doctors now suddenly in touch with me from Victoria who are opposing this thing. They are against it. Okay, so we are saying real doctors who care for the people would not say and scare people in this manner. So the unscaring part has to be done by somebody. Who's going to unscare the people? It's going to be these experts. Now, are they going to do it? Human beings, the way as you mentioned, human nature is complicated. Therefore, I don't expect Dan Andrews to back off. I would expect someone else to take his place, number one. I would expect someone else to take the chief health officer's place. It has to be in that manner, because reality is that people don't change their mind till the very end. You will find Dan Andrews saying he was right till the very end of his life. This is the reality of human nature. He will never ever change. This is unfortunate. But so politically, what's going to happen? But I think what the conversation we are raising today is something that should be continued, because I want us to understand what are the governance failures, what are the constitutional failures, what are the parameters around our functioning that allowed this kind of power to go to one single person. What happened? Why did we do this? How did we design our society in this manner? And I think that conversation, as I said, will be a long one and potentially may take 100 years. And this is at the pace at which society unfortunately works.
Sanjeev Sabhlok, thank you very much for your time and good luck with the future.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, James, very much for having me here. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, we now welcome back onto the show one of the friends of the Young IPA podcast, and also one of the last voices for freedom we actually have in the Victorian Parliament, which is, great to have you on the show, but a sad indictment on the rest of Victorian Parliament, which is David Limbrick. Welcome back from the Liberal Democratic Party.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right,
I'd like to have a more optimistic view that maybe I'm a small movement that's growing rather than a large movement that's shrinking. But anyway, maybe that's just me. But
well, if you keep up the speeches like you did about the state of emergency powers, I mean, I've had a lot of non-political friends of mine really get around that speech. So hopefully you are starting something. And but we want to talk to you because we discussed earlier in the show this COVID Omnibus Bill. And this is, as we said, it's gone past the lower house. It's now coming up to the upper house. So like the state of emergency powers, it is going to come down to how many crossbenchers that the Labor government can get to agree with this. Now, I would hesitate to guess and say you are against it. And yes. I just want you to want us to hear why exactly that is.
Okay, so for the listeners that aren't aware, an omnibus bill is a whole bunch of amendments that are often totally unrelated, all bunched together into a single bill. And a lot of the stuff in this bill is actually fairly harmless. They're talking about, extending arrangements for remote operations of government facilities and things like this. And it's fairly mundane and it's not a big drama. But there is one part in it which is quite alarming, which relates to authorised officers now, and giving those authorised officers new powers. Now, an authorised officer is effectively someone who is appointed by the Chief Health Officer to carry out certain functions on behalf of the Department of Health and Human Services and on behalf of the Chief Health Officer. And under this new amendment in the Omnibus Bill, what it allows, firstly, it allows pretty much anyone to become an authorised officer, which is concerning in itself. I'm not sure that was intended. I think that maybe they just thought police should be, but as far as I can tell, it seems like anyone can become an authorised officer. And it gives them this new power to detain people who are either test positive for COVID-19, or they're a close contact of someone that tests positive for COVID-19, and the authorised officer has a reasonable belief that they're not going to follow directions. So like self-isolation, quarantine type directions. And so there's a number of concerns with this. So firstly, we've got the concerns about someone who's not police actually arresting someone. That has a whole bunch of problems associated with it that I'm really concerned about. I'm not sure that the intent was for anyone other than police to have these powers, but as with all legislation, we don't want to look at just what the intent of the government is, because intent, doesn't really count for much. What really counts is what is possible with the legislation, right? So that's what we have to think about, the unintended consequences or the broadness of this legislation. But if we think about the other aspect of it with someone being arrested for what an authorised officer, whoever that might be, thinks about what someone's going to do, we're giving them the ability to arrest someone because they think that they might disobey a direction. Now, this is a very, very dangerous type of situation, and you can think of scenarios where this might be the case. I mean, I imagine that they're thinking of scenarios where you've got someone who has coronavirus, and they say, screw you, I'm just going to go out and do my own thing, and I don't care what you say, right? And that's the sort of situation that they're thinking about. But there's lots of other scenarios here, right? Think about the scenario that was given to me was, imagine that there's a mum, she works part-time, she's at home on one of her days off, and an authorised officer comes and knocks on her door. And the authorised officer says, one of your workmates has tested positive for COVID-19, you're a close contact, and you're now being directed to self-isolate at home for a fortnight or however long it might be that they want them to self-isolate for. And then she says to the authorised officer, oh, but I have to go and pick up my kids from school, right? That could be enough for the authorised officer to form a reasonable belief that she's not going to obey the directions, and she could be arrested at that point and, hauled away. There's a whole bunch of scenarios like this that are quite alarming. The idea that people get arrested who haven't committed a crime, but they just think that they're going to disobey some direction is very alarming. And, especially after the extension of the emergency powers that we saw that we've discussed before, and I was very opposed to, that the government's grasping for even more power to do more things that are, totally out of line with what should be happening in a free society is quite alarming. There's a lot of people concerned about this, as they were concerned with the extension of the emergency powers. I'm getting lots and lots and lots of contacts already by people that are alarmed by this. And I've got concerns, and I won't be supporting the bill in its current form.
Have you heard anything like this before, of someone being arrested on suspicion that they might commit a crime? Are there any precedents for this at all in Australia, or because it just seems like a huge...
I'm not aware of any. I mean, that doesn't mean that there aren't any, but I'm not aware of it. Maybe with some of the anti-terror federal legislation, there was some of these sort of weird things that could, they arrest people. See, the other problems here is that the current Public Health and Wellbeing Act already gives power to authorised officers to detain someone that they believe is infected with a disease and is not going to is going to go out and spread that in the community, right? It already gives them the power, but they also have recourse under that. Every 24 hours, it needs to be reviewed, whether it's still appropriate. There's a whole bunch of safeguards on that. Now, this new power not only gives them authority to stop the person that's infected with that disease, but also anyone that's designated as a close contact. It takes, and the period of detention that is sort of undefined. So we don't know how long someone could be detained under this. And we've already seen situations where people have had false positives. They've had been falsely identified as a close contact and then later contacted and said, oh, actually, you're not a close contact. So you can imagine situations where someone's designated as a close contact. They say, no, well, actually, I'm not. I don't know that person. I've never come into contact with that person. I don't know what you're talking about. That could be enough to arrest them, right? Because they say, well, you know, they're denying that they're a close contact of that person. And that could be enough to arrest them. And, you know, they might never have been actually a close contact, but because they're identified as such, they're a target under this new law. So, you know, it's just outrageous what they're trying to do here. And I think it's very dangerous. It's open to abuse. It's and here's the thing, right? I imagine in the government's mind, they're thinking, oh, well, you know, common sense will be applied here, you know, discretion and all this sort of stuff. But we've seen how a lot of these laws have been applied and there hasn't been common sense or discretion at all. In fact, you know, they said, I think the commissioner said that the time for discretion is over. So, you know, that was, you know, is this going to be applied in a sensible way and used effectively? And, you know, I don't trust that at all.
Yeah, especially because the last couple of weeks, we've certainly seen instances of what can only be described as police brutality. We've seen a man get hit by a car and they've had his head stamped on. There was viral footage over the weekend of a man at a beach surrounded by 8 officers and put on the ground and handcuffed despite saying he was within 5 kilometres of his house. And it just seems to be that those powers that exist with the police, and the police are struggling to use those powers in a fair and just way, are now going to be extended to people that don't have the same training as police officers. Like, I mean, people such as like PSOs on trains and private security guards and such.
Yeah, well, possibly. I mean, the legislation would allow it, I think. So it would allow, you know, WorkSafe officers to do this sort of thing at workplaces. You know, whether they're going to be designated as authorised officers or not, we don't know. But, you know, if the legislation allows it, then we have to consider the possibility that these sort of things might happen. And, you know, police at least are trained in how to detain someone and do all that sort of stuff. But I'm not sure WorkSafe officers are, and private security guards wouldn't be. And, you know, PSOs, they are trained in how to detain people. But again, like, how are they going to be forming these judgments, you know, a reasonable opinion that someone is not going to obey some direction? I mean, it could be just a comment could be enough to set them off, or they might not like the look of you. You know, I mean, I've had reports to me of, you know, a woman on a train. She was approached by a PSO. She was going outside the 5 kilometre from her house thing, but she had a legitimate reason. She was going to see her partner, which is allowed. And, you know, she was bailed up and questioned and ended up getting a fine, even though she maintains that she did nothing wrong and she was acting within the law and within the directions. But, you know, she has to go and try and get that reviewed and fight it and do all that sort of stuff now. And, you know, to my mind, they never should have done anything. So, and look, I know that there's been some shocking things that have happened with the police recently, but we have to remember that the police are being asked to do these really weird things at the moment. And, you know, these directions that the police are being asked to enforce, normally they would just be considered, you know, everyday activities. And police are sort of trained to, you know, identify bad guys and go after the bad guys. And now they're sort of being asked to treat people who are just going about their everyday business as bad guys. And, you know, it's bad things happen in these situations. These people that are having interactions with police now would normally never have interactions with police. They're not criminals. They're just people who have gone for a walk or go to see their boyfriend or or whatever they're doing, they're having all these sorts of interactions with police. And as everyone knows, when you increase the number of interactions with police, bad things can happen, right? And we don't want that to happen. So I've had concerns right from the start on how the government has been using these directions and leaning on the emergency powers the entire time, and expanding those powers is something that I'm not keen on at all.
That's a really good point. I mean, another point is that makes it difficult for police is that the rules actually change a fair bit, which makes it even another element of difficulty for them to keep track of what's going on. Now, we'll move on to another question. A Newspoll this week shows that Victorian support for Dan Andrews hasn't collapsed since last month. It has significantly decreased since April. It's still about 62%. What do you make of that? Now, you sort of last time we had you on the show, you disregarded a Roy Morgan poll on the basis that it was a text message poll, and you said that you just basically didn't buy it. What do you make of this one? How do you think it?
Well, the Roy Morgan poll was saying about 80%, wasn't it? So I don't know, if you believe both the polls, then we've got a fairly dramatic drop in support in a short period of time. Look. Again, I don't pay a lot of, I don't put a lot of faith in these polls, but look, it's undeniable that there is a large number of people that support what the government is doing. However, we have to consider that we have a very, very authoritarian government here. Authoritarian systems rely on followers, right? And we've seen this with the I Stand With Dan crew and all this sort of stuff. They're not really understanding, to my mind, when I talk to these people, they don't really understand the long-term strategy here. They're not sort of aware of many of the moral trade-offs that the government is making along these lines. They're just sticking with the tribe, right? And that's what a lot of it is. But there is a large and growing number of people who are questioning what the government is doing because it's directly affecting their lives. It's directly affecting their ability to work, to conduct their business, to interact with other people, and go and see their boyfriend or whatever. And they're asking questions about it. They're saying, "What's going on here?" And when they see some directions which they thought, everyone's saying, trust the experts, and there is no other choice. These are the sort of statements that the government says to sort of shut down rational debate. People, not everyone's idiots, right? A lot of people out there, they say about this curfew thing, how does that actually work? How does that help people? And people walk along the street with a mask in the middle of nowhere by themselves, and they're saying, how am I actually stopping the spread of the disease by following this law? And lots of people are questioning it. And, it's totally rational to question that. And more people will do it, I think, and are doing it. And they're not convinced by a lot of the rhetoric. And when you scratch the surface, they keep saying, trust the experts, we're basing it all on the science. Well, a lot of it's not based on science at all. The curfew's got nothing to do with science at all. In fact, the chief health officer wasn't his idea. The police weren't even consulted about it, apparently. It's just some nice idea that probably the Premier had. I don't know. We don't actually know who came up with the idea. A lot of these other things, they've admitted that, they can't model risk factors for individual activities. They're just trying to lower overall activity in the community. Therefore, they're not really based on any science. It's just leaning on the precautionary principle. So, there's not really that much science. And when you look at, they talk about, these models and the supercomputer and all this sort of stuff, but the models are very, very one-dimensional, right? They just feed a bunch of activity things into this model and try and plot that. But then they're forgetting all of the other things about the harms that they might be causing by their actions are not balanced properly against that. And so to my mind, it's not very scientific at all. So, I'm not particularly convinced. And I think there's a lot of people out there that aren't convinced, and probably a growing number that aren't convinced.
I just have one more question about the COVID Omnibus Bill. Now, this is coming before the crossbenchers at the moment. So these are the people that are going to decide this. What would you say to your fellow crossbenchers as they prepare to vote on it?
Well, consider what you're doing here. Like if you like, ultimately, right, people focus on the downstream effects, right? They focus on the police, kicking someone in the head and arresting someone and doing all these bad things. But ultimately, they're enabled by the government, which is enabled by the parliament itself, right? So ultimately, these downstream effects, the crossbenchers or whoever wants to support these sort of laws needs to be prepared to take responsibility for the downstream effects of this. And they need to consider that very carefully. And if they're allowing these new powers that conceivably will allow these awful situations to happen, they need to be prepared to take responsibility for that. And, that I think they have to seriously consider that, being held accountable for that.
David, you retweeted the piece co-written by the IPA's Zachary Gorman for the Foundation of Economic Education about the Eureka Stockade,
yes.
Which I won't go through a whole history lesson, but was effectively sort of won in the end by public opinion. Is there much chance is that the way out of this? Is public opinion changes and eventually the approach changes with public opinion? And if that is the case, how do we make that happen?
Yes, I think. And I think that the government is intentionally trying to suppress a lot of this conversation. Like I said, there is no other choice. Trust the experts. They demonize people who question it. We've spoken about this before about, I think I loved what you said, the demonization of dissent. But we've seen some very, very dangerous and anti-democratic things happen here. And the one that upsets me the most is the selective use of or the selective allowance of the right to freedom of assembly. And we saw back in June, there was the Black Lives Matter protest, which I actually attended. I copped a lot of criticism for attending that, but I wanted to bear witness to what happened there. And what I did witness was actually a fairly well-run protest event. People who were exercising their right of free assembly. They handed out masks. Everyone was wearing masks, and this was before masks were mandatory, by the way. People made a conscious choice to wear masks. They were using hand sanitizer and all this sort of thing, and it was fairly peaceful. But here's the other thing. The police were very professional, kept their distance. They were ready for trouble, but, there wasn't any trouble. They were there watching what was going on, and they were respectful of people's right to free assembly. Now, what we're seeing recently with protests is you even think about protesting against the government, and they'll come and kick your door in. They'll arrest you, like what happened with Zoe Bueller. And it was fairly tame what she was planning. She was actually instructing everyone to follow the social distancing and wear masks and all this sort of thing. If you actually go to a protest, you're very likely to get arrested. They'll send in, guys with shields and stuff and chase you around the park or whatever. But equality under law is a very important concept, right? And we are not seeing equal treatment of these two groups that are protesting. And I think that there is a lot of people that want to protest that are not protesting because they don't want to break the law. They don't want to get big fines. They don't want to get hurt. So they're staying at home. And, a few people who are just saying, I don't care, I'm going to break the law, I'm going to go out there. They're the ones that are going out and protesting now. It's easy for the government to say, well, these people are crazy. Look, there's only a small number of them. But if they restored the right to peaceful assembly, maybe we'll get a good sense of how much opposition there really is. Now, you mentioned my speech before. That I had no idea that was going to go crazy, right? It ended up getting, if you look at it on my Facebook page and on YouTube and on other third-party things, it was viewed over 300,000 times, right? If we think that, let's say 10% of those people were upset enough to go and protest, that's bigger than the Black Lives Matter march in June, right? And that's just people who viewed one video. So the idea that these are small numbers of people, I think is wrong. And I think that's why the government is not keen to restore the right to peaceful assembly, because they might have, tens of thousands of people on the streets against the government, and they'll be exposed.
Yeah, I reckon so too. All right, David Limbrick, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you to David and Sanjeev for those interviews. All right, sorry, long show, big show, huge show, fun show, but we are going to wrap it up with a few stories here at the end. Let's start off. Pete, take us through it.
That was sharp, James. That was really sharp. I want to start with the Australia Council for the Arts handing over $7 million to 1,100 individuals as part of the 2020 Resilience Fund in response to COVID-19 pandemic. Now, there's obviously been a lot of stimulus thrown around in the last little bit, so it's not like the end of the world that the artists got some now. But some of the stuff that got funded is the end of the world, James. Dr. Bella de Brera here at the IPA wrote a piece about it in the Daily Telegraph. In the piece, there's about half a dozen examples of the worst arts projects that were funded by this thing. James and I have chosen our favourites. James, you go first, because I'm a gentleman.
First off, I'm okay with arts being funded in the same way that if you're in the cafe industry right now, you're on JobKeeper. If you're an artist and you can't perform your work right now, then you should also be eligible for JobKeeper and so on. But we'll do the funny stuff. Okay, I loved Julie Vulcan's Dark Body. This one got funded. Did you pick that one too?
Yes, I did, but that's
I thought this was a clear winner. So in this one, Julie Vulcan invited gallery visitors to lie down next to 3 giant mounds made from a combination of mushrooms and dirt, and then proceeded to cover their eyes with bags of soil so they could experience the daily activities enacted in the dark around us and an intricate ecology that is essential to our ongoingness with the multi-species world. So basically, she found a way to just shovel dirt onto paying customers, and that is the dream. That's the dream.
She got $10,000 for that, and I like that she added mushrooms. Like, she could have just done the dirt, I reckon. The mushrooms was a special.
What if the mushrooms was a layover from an old art project, and it was either chuck them out or use them?
She just had them lying around. Anyway, my one, James, is $10,000 to a woman in Victoria who makes giant scarves and stitched text, which she places in various bush locations to deliver messages about coal mining and climate change. Now, the reason I like this is because it was $10,000, which is a lot, and it's just stitching stuff. It's not even like, there's a couple in here that are like, a big glass of water or a big glass cube, which is difficult. She's literally just sewing stuff about climate change and hanging them around the country. $10,000. So that's why she got my vote. But I would have done the piles of dirt. If I had.
They were 2 absolute classics. All right. Now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying last week elicited a lot of social media reaction, as I mentioned earlier in the show. Some of it was quite touching. I want to shout out people that drew attention to the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, pretty progressive, pretty left-wing, was best friends with Antonin Scalia, who was an extreme conservative. So that novel concept of being able to see past someone's political views and actually have them as a friend, not lost on Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Scalia, and that's just something we should all know it is possible, even at the highest points of society. Always found that really refreshing. But some of the social media tributes failed to hit the mark. And so I want Pete, you to decide who gets the crown for the worst social media tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Okay.
I've got 2 nominees here. I'm not going to use their names because these poor people have suffered enough. But oh boy. Okay. So social media tribute number 1. Just told my 10-year-old daughter about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She had tears in her eyes. And then she did the Wakanda pose. Sorry, let me pause there. Pete, do you know what the Wakanda pose is?
I don't know exactly what it is, but it's obviously related to that movie, isn't it?
Yeah, Black Panther. So it's like you just got to put your arms across your chest. It's like the Black Panther movie. I don't know. Same way to Superman putting his arm above his head and flying off. Like it's just essential to Black Panther, so you can read into black empowerments and stuff like that, which is what it's used for. But anyway. Then my 10-year-old daughter did the Wakanda pose and said #RuthKanda forever, which is a sort of pop culture crossover that I can celebrate.
Do we reckon that happened?
I don't think so, to be honest. I really don't think a 10-year-old managed to come up with RuthKanda forever. But I'll tell you one thing, Pete. I've definitely said RuthKanda forever to myself no less than 20 times since I saw that tweet.
Yeah, well, that's going to be hard to beat.
RuthKanda forever. Oh, delicious. All right, second one. This is like a script, okay? So it's just like an interplay between 2 people. Roe v. Wade. Welcome to heaven, Ruthie. RBG. Rowie, is that you? Roe v. Wade. Thank you for upholding my right to choose. RBG. I was only doing my job. Roe v. Wade. That's not what the Lord says. She can't stop talking about you. RBG. The Lord is a woman. Somehow I always knew. End scene.
Why is a judgment in heaven? Heaven is for humans.
Does he think Roe v. Wade is a person?
One of them has come and said that it was the biggest mistake of their life. I can't remember which one. Anyway.
Like, Roe v. Wade, thank you for upholding my right to choose. I think he thinks Roe v. Wade is a person.
That is mangled. That is quite mangled. And, yeah. I've got to pick the winner.
Which one was the worst one there?
I'm going to say the second. I don't want to bag the kid, you know. Like, you don't want to have a go at a kid if that happened.
But the kid definitely did not do it. If it makes you feel better, the kid definitely did not do the Black Panther pose and say Ruth Kanda forever.
Okay, maybe you're right. Yeah, I'll do the first one.
I think it's the first one by a considerable journey.
Because she's using the kid to make her point.
Now, last thing I want to point out with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death is that a impromptu memorial started in the streets. I think it was outside the Supreme Court, but basically people gathered around and they sung, in honor of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life, they sung Imagine. To me, could not have picked a worse song. Not saying that it doesn't fit Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I just don't think anyone deserves to be serenaded with Imagine at their death.
It's not what
even
you
my
need.
worst enemy.
It's not what you need in your final thing. Look, I actually love that song. Imagine. We've talked about this a few times, but it has been bastardized by idiots.
Do you also like vanilla milkshakes?
What's that, sorry?
Do you also like vanilla milkshakes?
Yeah.
And maybe like Friends?
Yeah. Do you mean the show or the?
That's why you like Imagine.
I can't believe I fell for that. I thought you meant Friends as in Friends, not Friends as in the TV show.
The TV show.
Yeah, nah, it's all right. I like the theme song. Nah, Imagine's a great song, James.
That's the song they should have picked. Do all the claps. All right, sorry. But now, because we've insulted the idea of singing Imagine, I think it's only fair that we give people what we would want to be serenaded with at our memorial service. Like, eventually, when the state funeral is caused for one of our passings, what should be the song that people despondently sing together?
Well, my favourite song of all time is Don't Look Back in Anger. And actually, that has been misused not misused, but the accusation has been misused as a memorial song because it kept getting sung after terrorist attacks in Britain. And a lot of people were saying, we shouldn't be saying Don't Look Back in Anger. We should be getting angry about this. So I want to kind of bring that back and get Don't Look Back in Anger, separate it from the political dispute and get it back on a positive footing. You know, get it back what it deserves. Yeah.
And it's also a very good message to send to people at your memorial service is don't look back in anger. Try desperately to remember the good parts.
Yeah. You got to take the good with the bad in this life. So...
I've been on record with this for a while, but if at my funeral there's only two songs that are going to be played, and it's Give Up the Funk by Parliament and then Got Your Money by the Old Dirty Bastard. And they're just on repeats. There's no speeches, it's just those two songs back to back until the end. People who know those songs know.
I haven't heard either of those songs.
I'll send them to you and you'll know. All right, last thing we want to talk about is this one really tickled your fancy, Pete. Princeton University said the quiet part out loud and they're suffering for it.
I have been pushing for this to happen a little bit, maybe not actually out loud with words, but in my head, I've been thinking this is something that should happen. And that is that Princeton University President Christopher Eisgruber, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, wrote an open letter on the university's website saying racism and the damage it does to people of colour persist at Princeton, as in our society. Racist assumptions from the past also remain embedded in structures of the university itself. So the Department of Education, the Trump administration, then sent them a letter saying, we are considering withdrawing your $75 million of funding that you received from the federal government because it's against Title VI to give money for the federal government to give money to organisations that are racist and discriminatory. And they also said, because you've been putting in your program, the things you have to submit, the program documents to get the $75 million of funding, since at least 2013, you've been saying you're not a discriminatory body, which is one of the requirements of getting federal funding. So you lied to us as well. So if you're racist and you're lying, we're not going to give you federal money. And I just think this is something we should be doing across the West. If these universities want to have all these stupid workshops where everyone says, yes, I'm a guardian of white supremacy and I'm racist, it's like, okay, fine. We're not going to fund you because you're racist. I don't know why this hasn't happened earlier, and it's the best thing that's happened this year.
I'm just relieved for him, to be honest. I'm relieved for Dean Christopher Icegruber. I mean, can you imagine the mental just the mental weight that has been hanging over him? That $75 million in federal funding has been going year after year to a racist institution.
Hey, clan funding.
He's finally free of it. Can you imagine what a relief it would be? He must be sleeping like a baby.
He would be a relieved person, but he should be. But he said the university disagrees and is looking forward to furthering our educational mission by explaining why our students and actions are consistent not only with the law, but also with the highest ideals and aspirations of this country. It's like, nah, mate, sorry. Too late. 75 million already gone. So, yeah, that's my view on that.
Okay, we'll leave it there. That is it for the show this week. Bumper show, huge show. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you like the show and you're not, let me say, all right. If you like the show, if you enjoyed that, except for that last little 5 seconds of word vomit that I just had, make sure you're leaving us a review on iTunes, and we're also available on any podcast platform and on YouTube. So if you do have friends and family that would enjoy the show, make sure you're telling them about us, and then go listen to the IPA's other podcasts. So The IPA with You had an episode come out yesterday that was big on the Omnibus. Gideon got very fired up. If you want some more Omnibus stuff, that is where to go. We've also got Looking Forward coming out every week. They've got an episode coming out today as well. Viral Banter had a new episode last week. And then you can go back in the IPA vault, listen to Australia's Future, listen to 5 Favourite Books, listen to the Great Books of Literature podcast. All right, that is it from me. See you guys next week.
See you guys. Thank you, Saul. Bye.